You know what? If you've been a regular on our channel, you know that we do a lot of reviews 100 days later. But that's always with a single phone. But in 2026, we want to try something different. It's been 100 days since the launch of the OPPO Find X9 and the vivo X300. And therefore, we wanted to do a comparison of both these phones, which we haven't done till now, to find out which one's the better buy 100 days later. And if you look at it, both share very similar core DNAs. They're both compact phones. Of course, the vivo X300 is smaller. You get the same Dimensity 9500 chip. You've got silicon carbon batteries. You've got fast charging, wireless charging, IP rating. All of that is similar. Then is there something that sets them apart? Well, there is. And I'll tell you what that is in the end. Alright, welcome to our very first 100 days later comparison of the OPPO Find X9 against the vivo X300. This is me, Ershad. You're watching Trakin Tech English, your destination for detailed, incisive gadget reviews. Now, starting with the design and build, the one thing we noticed, immediately after getting these phones is that the vivo X300 looks a lot like a smaller vivo X200. It's not too different considering the fact that you actually get that circular camera module. But I do like this dual tone design. And the Find X9 in comparison has a squircle camera module and it looks like a smaller Find X9 Pro. Now, when you keep both these phones on a table and when you type, OPPO has a tendency to wobble as opposed to vivo. See, design is subjective, but most people in our team tend to prefer the Find X9 as opposed to the vivo X300, but I think the vivo X300 also looks very good. But what the X300 has in its favor is that it's actually smaller and lighter compared to the Find X9. So it's far more easier to grip and hold and use every day. I think making the base X300 flagship a compact phone was the killer decision that vivo made this year. Now, durability is one thing that we definitely wanted to test because both have a glass sandwich design, which means that you have glass on the front, glass on the rear, and a very nice soft aluminum railing as well. And we've dropped it multiple times, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, and thankfully there's nothing, literally nothing to show for it. And these have been proper primary daily driver devices in the office. And of course, you do get both IP68 and IP69 rating. You get a nice soft touch back. So yeah, it feels very premium. Both. I mean, for people who say that the iPhone has a premium design, have you taken a look at Android flagships? They're very premium too nowadays. Now, ports and buttons are largely similar on both except for the fact that the Find X9 actually has that AI key for, mind space, which definitely is an advantage. And I kind of like the AI key. Of course, it can also be remapped. Vivo doesn't have one. And the good thing is, unlike the iPhone 17, both the X300 and the Find X9 actually have faster USB speeds. So you get USB 3.2 speeds and data transfers are much better. So overall, with respect to design and build quality, I would say that X300 has a bit of an edge only because it's smaller, lighter, and more comfortable to use. But the Find X9 has a slightly larger display, which some people might prefer. There's still a lot left to talk about in this 100 days comparison. But before I move on, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and give us your support. It takes just a second and your support is really valuable to us. Now, when you take a look at the displays, the X300 actually has a smaller display this year and the Find X9 has a slightly larger display, but it's still very compact. Now, both use AMOLED technology and have 120Hz refresh rate at the top end, but there's one key difference, and that is the X300 has LTPO technology, which means that it can refresh from anywhere between 1 to 120 Hz, whereas the Find X9 has LTPS technology. It cannot go down to 1 Hz. And therefore, power efficiency of the display on the X300 will be better, is what we're guessing, but we'll talk about the battery life in a bit. Now, with respect to sharpness and resolution, I think there's nothing telling the two apart, but yes, the Find X9 does have slimmer bezels compared to the X300. However, the color tuning is slightly different with different biases on each of these panels. On the Find X9, we used the natural mode for testing, and on the X300, we actually used the Pro mode. Now, what vivo does is that it pushes a stronger greens and it has more balanced skin tones. And whereas if you look at the OPPO's color tuning, it's a little bit more, skewed towards the reds and the blues. But overall, if you look at the color accuracy, I think that vivo does a better job compared to OPPO. Now, both support HDR10 and HDR10+, but vivo handles brighter highlights better and gets brighter outdoors too. Now, both have very reliable ultrasonic in-display fingerprint scanners, and we haven't faced any problem in the 100 days that we've used it. Now, the haptic feedback tuning is definitely very good on both, considering that you'll get smaller motors inside these smaller phones. But I feel like the Find X9 does slightly better localized, vibrations. Now, you also do get stereo speakers with both the phones, but OPPO's is slightly louder and slightly fuller. Actually, take a listen to it for yourself and let me know what you guys think. Now, after 100 days, one thing that everybody would want to know is which one of these displays picks up scratches faster. I would say that both are almost equally good, except for the fact that OPPO seems to be slightly better at scratch resistance compared to vivo, which picks up slightly more scratches. Now, OPPO has Corning Gorilla Glass 7 eye protection, which is actually a mid-range protection, but it does a fairly decent job because we haven't used the screen guard with these phones. And with the X300, the Shot Sensation Alpha scratches up slightly faster. So overall, yeah, the display and multimedia experience would be a bit of a tie. Now let's talk about the cameras. And with both the phones, what you get is a triple camera setup on the rear. So the setup is identical, but the hardware is slightly different because the primary camera on the Vivo is a 200 megapixel sensor, the same sensor used in the telephoto of the X300 Pro. And with the Find X9, what you get is a 50 MP sensor. And Vivo also has a larger 50 MP selfie camera with autofocus, whereas OPPO has a 32 megapixel selfie camera. Now, 100 days later, we've taken photo samples again, and this is what we think about the camera performance after multiple updates. Now, for the primary camera, both phones use a large 1x1.4 inch primary sensor, but the difference is megapixels. And therefore, in daylight, Vivo clearly benefits from the higher resolution. So even when you're comparing the 50 MP outputs on both the phones, Vivo captures more fine textures and micro details. Now, OPPO's images are more contrasty, which some people might prefer, but a pure detail standpoint, Vivo wins. Now, Vivo can also shoot full 200 megapixel images. Now, these are excellent for cropping in. So say, for example, if you have a wide landscape, you can just zoom in and get like a nice crop out of it. But note that you cannot use it for action shots, obviously, because at that 200 megapixel resolution, you will have to wait for the camera to actually process the image for a little bit. Also, they'll end up eating a lot of your storage space if you buy the base variant, so keep that in mind. So you might want to use it only in certain situations where you're shooting a landscape and your phone has to be very stable. HDR tuning is clearly Vivo's game here. Now, not saying that OPPO is bad, but OPPO actually has a tendency to shoot brighter images, but Vivo in general has a very good control over the highlights. I mean, Vivo's HDR tuning is probably the industry best right now, and there's no brand that is able to beat it yet. By the way, when shooting people against a harsh backlight, I think both do a good job. Now, in low light shots, we notice that Vivo pulls out more shadow detail, and OPPO tries to suppress the noise, and therefore the details get smoothened out as a result. Color science is definitely Vivo's strong point, because with the Zeiss natural color, especially when you're shooting landscape shots or some subjects with, bright colors out there, I feel like Vivo does a very balanced tuning here as opposed to OPPO, which has slightly boosted colors. Now, when it comes to skin tones in general, clearly Vivo is better than OPPO, which has a very heavy red cast. But if you're looking at the better camera for portrait photography, I would probably go with the Vivo here. At most comparable focal lengths, we felt like the semantic segmentation and the bokeh drop-off looked more DSLR-like on the Vivo compared to OPPO. I'm not saying that the OPPO is bad, but I feel like Vivo does a better job. And this is after multiple updates, mind you. Ultra-wide is where OPPO makes a comeback. The edge detail is better and the distortion around the edges is better controlled. Now, since Vivo has a higher resolution 50 MP autofocus selfie camera, selfies definitely I would prefer Vivo over OPPO. Now, when you look at zoom performance, I feel like OPPO has a bit of an edge here, but Vivo does 2x zoom shots better than OPPO, primarily because you get a higher resolution primary camera, and when you zoom in, you get more details at 2x crop. But when you start shooting with the actual periscope cameras, which zoom in at 3x and beyond, like say 3x, 6x, 10x, 30x, I feel like OPPO's zoom tuning is better than Vivo's. Now, video recording is very close here. In daylight, Vivo is slightly better when you pixel peep. In low light, Vivo has better noise control. So overall, I feel like Vivo has a slight edge with camera tuning. But again, some people might just prefer OPPO over Vivo. Which one do you prefer? We've taken shots, you've seen them. Let me know in the comments. I'd love to know your thoughts. Now on to performance, and both of course have MediaTek Dimensity 9500, so therefore you get the same CPU and GPU configuration and architecture, right? However, the performance is slightly differently tuned on both. Now initially when we tested it at launch, Vivo scored higher on Antutu compared to OPPO, but after several updates, OPPO is actually beating Vivo now. In Geekbench, both before and after the update, Vivo scores higher than OPPO in both single core and multi-core scores. And in our CPU throttle test, you can tell that there is barely any difference in the scores here. So yeah, so it's almost similar on both. Now, what made us feel like OPPO is slightly better at stability is the GPU stress test that we ran. So in the 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme stress test, essentially the scores are largely similar, especially when you take a look at the FPS, but the stability is marginally better on the Find X9 compared to the X300. And we've run these tests fresh after updates, mind you. And storage speeds are very fast on both. Again, again, nothing telling the two apart. The read-write speeds are largely similar. Now, we played Genshin Impact and Wuthering Waves, and in Wuthering Waves, OPPO clearly shows that it has the better average FPS and far lower temperatures compared to vivo. OPPO is better tuned for longer gaming sessions where vivo tends to throttle. However, in daily usage, when you're not pushing for gaming performance, you won't be able to tell the difference. Now, since OPPO is a larger phone compared to vivo, it actually uses that space to fit in a larger battery. So you get a 7025 mAh battery on OPPO, and the X300 actually has a 6000 odd mAh battery. And because of this, you do get better battery life. We're constantly averaging 8.5 hours of SOT with the Find X9. With the X300, it's not bad. It's at about 7.5 to 8 hours. So you do get more screen on time and therefore better battery life. And this is across similar usage on both the phones, which means that OPPO makes up for that lack of LTPO technology by offering a larger battery and therefore better battery life. So the power inefficiency of the display doesn't really matter too much here. Now, with respect to charging technologies, I would say that wired charging is largely similar speed on both, because vivo offers 90 watt, OPPO offers 80 watt. But since OPPO has a larger battery, it takes slightly longer to charge with the wired charging speeds. However, if you buy OPPO's official wireless charging accessory, you can charge it at 50 watts, whereas vivo still does 40 watt, which is not bad either. Now, we use both the phones with SIM cards, and I can tell you with a fair bit of confidence that connectivity is definitely not going to be a problem. 5G network performance is fantastic on both. And you also get support for Wi-Fi 7, NFC. Yes, if you're looking for the latest Bluetooth 6 standard, then you get that on OPPO, but still, I would say, a little bit of a difference between the two. Now, remember when I said there's one thing separating the two, and the one thing that's separating the two is the software experience. And I can tell this with a fair bit of confidence that I prefer the ColorOS experience on Find X9 over OriginOS. Now, don't get me wrong, OriginOS is a great update over FrontTouchOS, and both these phones do offer 5+6 years of updates, which is nice. But there are reasons why ColorOS is better, because ColorOS has been doing this for a while now, and the experience is far more polished and refined. For example, it's smoother, more fluid, and the parallel animations 2.0 ensures that you do not face any kind of stutter. So if you do that, back-to-back opening and closing tests of apps, then OPPO performs better compared to vivo. Now, apart from that, it's clean and it doesn't have the VApp store pinging you every day, unless of course you switch it off on the vivo. But yes, it's not there. It's cleaner generally on ColorOS. There are more useful AI features. For example, the Mindspace with Gemini integration is pretty awesome. Now, both the phones do have Circle to Search in Gemini, but yeah, these small tiny touches like Mindspace definitely sets OPPO apart. And the whole design UI itself looks, I feel, cleaner and much better and more refined compared to OriginOS. Now, you could have a different opinion because some people like the fun, playful approach of Origin, but I really like ColorOS, yaar. One thing I do like about OriginOS, and I keep talking about it, actually two things. First one is the Origin Island experience. Of course, OPPO also has the dynamic island-like implementation, but vivo takes it one step ahead because you can, drag and drop stuff to it directly and share it with apps. Now, both the phones also do offer great PC connectivity, interconnectivity. With OPPO, it's O+ Connect, and with vivo, it's the Office Kit. But still, overall, OPPO's software experience is what sets it apart compared to vivo. So yeah, now you must be asking, Aishad, which one would I pick? Now, after thinking about it a little deeply, I would say that I'm siding with the Find X9 here. And for most people who are looking at a phone in this price range, I would probably recommend the Find X9 over the vivo X300. Again, not saying that the X300 would be a bad buy. It's too little of a difference, but there's one important reason why I'm saying that. See, hardware-wise, it's largely similar. There's very little difference between the two, right? Display, performance, cameras, and to a large extent, even the battery is similar on both. And considering that vivo is a smaller phone, it does a very good job with the battery as well. But the key differentiator here is the software experience, and that's where I feel like ColorOS inside OPPO beats OriginOS inside vivo. Again, disclaimer, vivo's OriginOS experience is far better than whatever FunTouch experience we had earlier, but I feel like there are 2 or 3 iterations to go before it can get to the polish and the sort of fluidity of ColorOS and OxygenOS for that matter. All said and done, I love how both OPPO and vivo are ruling the Indian market, but doing it without making a big hue or cry about it. They're doing it silently by offering really good products at very good value, no less. And you know what? If you get a good deal on either one of these two phones, I would say close your eyes and buy it, because the service network for both are pretty robust, and they do also consistently get updated, which is very important. Anyway, what did you guys think? Would you prefer the Find X9 over the X300 or the other way around? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, keep tracking and stay safe.